Question 14. What is a bean postprocessor and how is it different to a bean factory postprocessor? What do they do? When are they called? What is an initialization method and how is it declared on a Spring Bean? What is a destroy method? How is it declared and when is it called? Consider how you enable JSR 250 annotations like post-construct and pre-destroy. When, how will they get called? How else you can define an initialization or destruction method for a Spring Bean? So this is a long question. Let's take each part of the question and let's give a deep explanation and what is it meant and what is the correct answer here. Let's start with the bean postprocessor. So bean postprocessor is an interface and this interface allows you to create the extensions for the Spring framework. And this interface contains two methods, the postprocess before initialization and postprocess after initialization. And when you are implementing those methods, you can modify the Spring Bean objects that then will be used in the Spring context. And this is happening before the initialization of the bean and after initialization of the bean. The main difference compared to the bean factory postprocessor is that bean factory postprocessor works with the bean definitions and the bean postprocessor works with the objects. And it is also important to remember that when these methods will get called, then you have the bean object that is already created and also it is assembled. That means that all of the properties and all of the dependencies are already set there. So in terms of the life cycle, the bean factory postprocessor gets called whenever the bean definitions are ready, and those are ready when Spring will read the bean definitions from the configuration. In terms of the bean postprocessor, then there are two places where it gets called. So the first method, postprocess before the initialization, is called before the initialization method gets called, but after instance of the bean is created and also after all of the properties and dependencies are set. Now, postprocess after initialization gets called after all of the initialization method will get called. So now let's have a look how to declare the bean postprocessor, and the recommended way to declare the bean postprocessor is within the application configuration with the usage of the static bean method, and this is because we want to have bean postprocessor ready early in the process because we will process other beans. So because it's early in the process and we want all of the beans to be processed by it, that means that it should be static to inform Spring that we want this bean to be created as soon as possible. Now let's go into the examples and let's look how it works in action. So we have question 14 examples, and after I have the custom bean postprocessor defined over here, this one will actually not modify the bean objects, but it will only print out that it was possible to modify the bean object. And as you can see, the bean object is passed over here, and also we are returning bean object. That means that I can not only change this bean, but I can switch this bean over here, or I can, for example, create a proxy object for this bean. The same applies for the post-processing after the initialization. Now let's have a look how this bean postprocessor is created. So I have this one registered in the application configuration, and I have this one registered over here in the static method. When we will run this example, we will see that this bean postprocessor got called for all of the beans that are declared over here. So it got called for the application configuration because the application configuration is a bean itself. Also, it got called on the Spring Bean 3, 4, 1, and also for the Spring Bean 2. So let's process further. Let's get the next part of the question. What is an initialization method and how is it declared on a Spring Bean? So the initialization method is the place in the Spring Bean when you can write the initialization code, initialization logic that depends on the properties or the dependencies. So you might be thinking why we cannot put this one in the constructor, and the answer for this is that if we would put it in the constructor, when constructor get called, there is no guarantee that all of the dependencies will be already set there, because it might be the case that you are using the private field injection or the property injection through the setter instead of using the constructor injection. And if you would put all of your code into the constructor, then you have a risk that Spring will not inject all of the dependencies which you are requiring. So the correct place where to put the initialization logic that is dependent on all of the dependencies is the initialization method, and you can declare it with three ways. The first one is to use the method that is annotated with the post construct annotation. The second way is to implement the initializing bean after properties set. And the third way is to create a bean in the bean configuration with the usage of the bean method and use the bean init method field. So now let's go back to the example, and in the example I have Spring Bean 1 that has post construct, also it has after properties set, and this after properties set is coming from the initializing bean. And also I have the init method, and this init method is used in the application configuration through the bean init method over here. So now after running this example, you will see that for Spring Bean 1, all of those methods got called. The post construct, after properties set, and also init method. Now let's go to the next part of the question. The next part of the question is about the destroy method. So the destroy method is a method which we would write in the Spring Bean to put all of the logic that is responsible for cleaning up the resources. So let's say that you have a bean and this bean keeps a state, and inside this bean you are keeping, for example, connections to your database. When the application is stopped and when the Spring context is getting closed, you would most probably like to close all of those DB connections. So this is a great place for you to implement this logic. And there are also three ways to declare the destroy method. The first one is to use the pre-destroy annotation. The second one is to implement the disposable bean destroyed method. And the third one is to create a bean in the configuration class through the bean method and implement the destroy method. So now let's have a look at an example of the Spring Bean 2, and it has implemented all of those ways. The first one is the pre-destroy method annotated with the pre-destroy annotation. Then we have a destroy method that is implemented from the disposable bean, and also we have a destroy method, and this destroy method is used in the application configuration in the bean annotation. And after running this example, we can see that for Spring Bean 2, when the context is getting close, all of those methods got called. Now there is also a question: how do you enable the JSR 250 annotations like the post construct and the pre-destroy? And the good news is that you do not need to take any additional steps. Basically, if you are using the annotation config application context, then common annotation bean post processor is already defined for you, and this common annotation bean post processor is supporting the post construct and also pre-destroy, so everything works out of the box. Now, in terms of the part of the question when the initialization and destroy method gets called, basically the initialization method are getting called after we have an instance of a bean that is created, after we have all of the bean definitions, and after we have all of the properties and dependencies set. The bean post processor will get called first, so post process before initialization will get called, and then first the annotated method will get called, then the after property is set from the initializing bean, and then the bean init method will get called. After this initialization is performed, the bean post processor will be called again with the post process after initialization method. In terms of the destroy method, basically this is called whenever the context is closed, and also if you have the registered the shutdown hook, or if you are using the trial of resources, then most probably context will get closed whenever the application is finishing, and for the web application the context is getting closed whenever the application is getting undeployed from the server. First, you will have the pre-destroy method that will be called, then the destroy method from the disposable bean, and then the bean destroyed method. And that's it for this question.